So I'm going to talk to you guys and share some more thinking. But I do need to mention that the work I'm going to share with you is, I have a partner. She can't make it. Her name is Lopamudra Bannerjee. She's also from the New School. She's an assistant professor of economics. And so this work is in collaboration with her. So when I say we, I mean her and me. And so, as I said, Lopa is an economist. I'm an urban designer, and my training is in landscape architecture. So yeah, I'm going to talk for an hour, and then we're going to take a break, and we're going to do a drawing. So I'm going to hand it to you to give some material feedback, another type of making with our hands, because we've had a lot of words happen here. So keep that in mind. I have some work for you after the break. And then we'll have a pin-up and a discussion, design style. So when I was invited, when the invitation came to put a proposal together for designing China, I went to a book in my friend's library, and I like this quote, and this map that I have here, which is what I still want to start with. And the quote is, and the book is by Edward Dennison and Guang Yu Ren, called Building Shanghai. Shanghai is a settlement formed many hundreds of years ago that evolved into an illustrious merchant community and a unique Chinese city. Early foreign descriptions rarely allude to this. Instead, they disparage the nature of the land and the people they encountered, so exalting their own contribution. The foreigner did not transform a sedgy swamp into a magnificent city through self-ordained civilizing brilliance, but invaded their gateway to China and exploited a well-established mercantile community by exposing it to international trade. So this image is of Shanghai, and this is the map showing this mercantile delta and the many other cities that were inhabiting this wet landscape that we're in the end of the typhoon at the present. So our question was to how can we critically theorize the transformation of this walled mercantile waterway into a site of colonial resource extraction, and then into a site of rapid and risky urbanization and beyond. And so to do this, to offer to you today, to attempt to theorize about this, I want to offer you two unstable images to sort of kick around, like we're kicking around many concepts. These two unstable images are, the first one is creative destruction, and the second one is resilience. So why unstable images? Because we think that unstable images can help us engage the dynamic nature of our cities better than stable images. It's pretty straightforward. And just some quick definitions to get started. Quick definition of creative destruction. Creative destruction, presented in the writings of Joseph Schumpeter, who's an economist, explores how the process of industrial mutation and the modernist project of city building continually revolutionizes the urban economic structure from within, incessantly destroying the old one, incessantly creating the new one. The second unstable image is resilience, and this is linked to ecology theory, and it has to do with non-equilibrium ecosystem models. I was just looking for Michael Keith. Can't see him. He was mentioning this morning. So non-equilibrium ecosystem models imagine the world as comprised of multiple stable transitions between states of material flux. And resilience is the capacity of a system to adjust to these changing conditions and to persist. So in this view, sustainability, this big word we play with, I don't know what it is, but in this view, sustainability is maintaining flexibility and functional soundness rather than the capacity of a system to return to some stable point after perturbation. So these two unstable images are big images, and in many ways they make us feel, I think, they make us feel smaller in the world. But maybe as we start to understand them, we will become more agile and more sophisticated within them. And I just want to briefly say we also believe that unstable images can engage the dynamic nature of our bodies better than stable images. I like this part here I've been playing with for a little bit, is in addition to our five senses, sight, taste, smell, touch, and hearing, proprioception is the sense of the relative position of neighboring parts of our body. It is the concept that the body has a space, which is a type of image we make to understand our bodies. I think of it as how you think of your body when you're trying to balance. It shifts around, and that moving around is a type of space, a type of image you create to balance yourself. So it's an unstable image, it's always relational. And then Bergson from Mind and Matter, he describes the world as a universal flux of images where the body is itself an image amongst other images, a special kind of image, a center of indetermination which acts as a filter, creatively selecting facets of images from the universal flux according to its own capacities. So it's sort of an idea of our bodies, we're sort of like filters, we're like sponges, unstable sponges. And so as designers, we create these, no, I won't say that part yet. I just wanted to, just going on this imagination of our bodies and the way that we understand ourselves in relation to our environment is, this is an idea of space as something is created through movement. So it's a little bit of a different idea of space than say a container with an object in it. It's an idea of space as something you create, you carry with you through your movement. So if I'm successful today, I sort of will start to plant the seed for a love of unstable images. Okay, so out of all the unstable images in the world, why have we chosen creative destruction and resilience? And it's part of the experimental spirit of this workshop. It's because we believe the intersection of economics and ecology is fertile ground for thinking about, for understanding design for the future. So modern economics and ecology, I don't know if you know this, but they emerged at the same time. During the progressive period from the 1890s to World War II. They both reflect the modern corporate industrial system. Economics and ecology share such terms as producers and consumers, as well as valuing efficiency and a faith in management. Worcester says, in a one-way direction, ecology to date has been influenced by economic concepts. In ecology, in 1994, after recognizing a number of limits to its disciplinary progress, such as specializing sub-disciplines and unproductive or unrewarding debates between paradigms, they've begun exploring integrative frameworks and their application to focus diverse ecological issues and critical questions. And I've been lucky to be working with some of these ecologists for the last 5 years to sort of experiment with these integrative frameworks. They've been sort of like us, kicking around. More recently, economics, which is why I started to work with Lopa, has also recognized some theoretical limits to their disciplinary progress. For example, the myth of the border to the economy, as well as the assumption that capitalism has a singular logic. And in response, economic research has reoriented economic analysis transversally. And the way I understand that is a line that intersects two other lines. For example, human economic interaction with natural systems is no longer viewed merely in terms of resource constraints and production-consumption externalities. Instead, human economic interaction is located within the broader system of human-nature interactions, and issues of mitigation and adaptation are emphasized. So we start to wonder if this is seeing a reversal of flows of ideas moving from ecology out to economics. I should also say in Parsons I teach in integrated design. So now I'm going to start to unpack creative destruction for you a little. And then within that I'm going to nest resilience. And then I'm going to try and bring it back to the delta. We like creative destruction because we think it's open and it's evocative. I like this quote written by Strassman in 1955. The concept recalls the death and birth cycles of nature and various tribal myths of gods shuttling between ferocity and compassion. Reminds me of our discussion of dragons yesterday. So we've sort of found two trends in our literature review this summer, and I'm going to go through these two. The first one we've called friction. So creative destruction has been used as a metaphor, and we talked about that also yesterday as a residue of translation. A metaphor for a permanently unsettled rhythm in many different fields of study, including economic geography, growth models, industrial organization and network theory, urban planning, architecture and design, literary criticism and cultural studies. And I have 3 examples for you of the literature review. So I suppose what I'm saying is this concept is open for us to see if it's going to be useful for us. Page, 1999, examined the intentional destruction and rebuilding of the city of Manhattan in the first 4 decades of the 20th century to analyze the process of capitalist urbanization. Gilliand, in 2002, drew upon the concept to illustrate Montreal's renewal in the late 19th century as a modern site of commerce and urban growth through the destruction of existing properties and construction of wide city streets for expanded urban vascular systems. And then another interpretation of the concept, Mitchell, along with her collaborators, has described how the creation of economic opportunities through commercialization of heritage and tradition entails the very destruction of these values, and applied the model to examine evolutionary transformations of the economic and cultural conditions of small communities and idyllic towns in Canada and China. And in a similar application of the concept, Tons in 2002 described how a development path based on commodification of idealized rural landscapes has led to the gradual destruction of some of the more scenic and accessible countryside in Australia, where I'm from originally. In Chinese cities, master planning is engaged in a manner which has been described by Adriana Abdennour as urbanization for globalization rather than urbanization through globalization. In the late 1990s, the municipal government of Beijing decided to clear Chaoyang district in eastern Beijing to build from scratch the new central CBD. And since 2000, over 200 municipal governments in China have decided to create CBDs. Urban areas devoted to linking local economy to the global economy and to accommodate global businesses and the elites who inhabit them. So this is a sort of centralizing pattern here. The build and they shall come approach ensues from an implicit or explicit trickle-down theory in which greater prosperity emanates from a geographic node of growth. There's an emphasis on centrality, and often Manhattan is used as an example for this speculative CBDization of China. Fisher, for another example of how the term creative destruction, this unstable image is being used, argues that the temporarily unfinished newness of the early 19th century, the American Jeffersonian map, made it possible to sketch the philosophy for a new, permanently unsettled rhythm of creation and destruction. He writes, the initial unfinished newness defined the terms for a more permanent newness. I think that's the way in which we were talking a little bit about history yesterday. He lays out the path of how, in his case, American society has come to prefer a minimal social space to the thick detail of a culture that is passed on from generation to generation. He argues that the pressure and freedom of the resocialization or the removing of persons and things into an ever-changing frame where years from now many even newer persons and things will define the texture and the meaning of the whole. And to describe that, he describes persons and things together as a type of immigration process. So for us, the important thing for us in this first literature review was we sort of realized that the creative destruction sort of embodies these this friction, or there are many other words you could use to describe it. Often they use a military language of conflicting forces, but it also reminded me of disjunctive flows of a paderai, but it also reminded me of more some of the thinking about the way we live within capitalism, which is the sort of the schizophrenia that Deleuze and Guattari write about, and also the double bind that we mentioned yesterday of Bateson. So this unstable image is the sort of the world that we're living in. We talked about it this morning, maybe with the constantly new, constantly arriving. It's relentless, a pitiless process. But for us, the important thing, I should just go up, to emphasize is the way that creative destruction colors our imagination in a way that we could see this friction and between the objectives of creation and control in any modernizing project and the inescapable destructive effects that these constructions are having in economic practices, in social spaces, and in the natural instability of any region. And for us, for thinking about design, we're interested in how within this sort of frictional space, how design can create tighter feedback loops to make us able to sense and comprehend and to consciously transform our friction-laden landscapes into the nation state. So it's not a position of resistance, but it's a position, it's trying to think about how you can tighten the disjunctive flows. So this image here is actually from ecology. It's a panarchy model where different scales are interlinked, but I think that it starts to sort of color the sort of slippery spaces where maybe design has agency. Second trend is in disaster studies. Lopa writes that disasters materialize when the nature of economic agents and biophysical processes change and they become more rigid and the system fails to absorb shocks. So in the literature review, creative destruction is applied to describe the direct effects of disasters on economic variables such as capital accumulation, employment growth, and total factor productivity. The main argument presented in the body of work is that while disasters destroy the physical capital stock and other tangible assets of an economic unit and cause a decline in productivity in the short run, they also provide the impetus for absorption of the modern and more up-to-date technology and or an update in factor composition, thus creating the opportunity for greater efficiency in the long run. So disasters may provide the momentum and incentives for renewal and growth of an economy, but also not everybody can benefit from this momentum since certain preconditions are necessary for a production unit to absorb risk and turn it to a creative advantage. And so in the trend in the literature, the destructive part of creative destruction is often a socio-natural process, such as a flood. And this ecosystem process is obviously often a very rapid process, and it becomes, we call it a disaster when it fails to absorb shock. That's when we give it the label. And so this type of dynamic within which there's socio-natural interactions and economic interactions, and they're all starting to relate and respond to each other. And at some point we call them a disaster. Just that sort of phenomenon that we're trying to understand right now is the type of dynamic that I just want us to hold for a minute as I start to move my talk across more to ecology theory and the topic of what they call disturbance. So the link between disaster and disturbance, I'm just going to talk about that for a little bit. In 1973, like I said, the ecologists got started earlier than the economists in rethinking their world. 1973, ecologists began to introduce words into ecological literature to help explain their observations of non-linear ecosystem dynamics to a broader audience. To draw distinctions between efficiency and persistence, between constancy and change, and between predictability and unpredictability, resilience, this word, was introduced by Holling. Later, in 1985, Pickett and White introduced the the word disturbance to describe events which have a slow onset, fast duration, and a quick release. This word for them, disturbance, communicated urgency, as well as a sense of movement, and both a scarcity and an overabundance meet the definition of disturbance. So the way I was talking about disasters before, they can be good for some people and bad for others. For ecologists, it doesn't matter. A fire could be good for a forest, or it could be bad for a neighborhood, or bad for the forest if there's been a fire the year before. So to explain what this means to the practices of ecosystem science, we can say there's been a shift in the study of the compositioning and functioning of an ecosystem to the study of the processes of disturbance and the evolutionary significance of these events. So I see this in that in the late 80s, ecology got located back in time. It got embedded back in the duration of the way systems work on the planet, rather than assuming that there is a stable point, a stable planet within which we've sort of destabilized it. Non-linear, non-equilibrium theory says that there's no equilibrium. So they located themselves back into the dynamic nature of natural systems in a very smart way. So they also developed the two integrative frameworks, which is called the Human Ecosystem Framework and Patch Dynamics, to communicate with each other, because ecology was very fractured. So they developed integrative frameworks to begin to be able to talk to each other, and also to the public. So these tools help focus their specific questions. I like that idea of being able to focus regarding how spatially heterogeneous processes interact with each other across multiple spatial and temporal scales, and for them understanding how cross-scale interactions and fast-slow dynamics influence the dynamics of urban systems is critical for achieving resilient urban futures. So there's even been a shift in ecology towards not talking about sustainability, but to start to talk about resilience. So this drawing here is what they call the Human Ecosystem Framework. Scientists love word diagrams. I won't go into it, but the important thing for me is this diagram is meant to encompass everything in the world, and they sort of when it hits the world, hits the ground, it focuses their questions. But I like this drawing here, where it's a model that focuses in on a patch of the world, but they always understand that someone else could be looking at another patch and learning something very different. So it's a patchy diagram. I'm just going to talk a little bit now about urban design meeting ecology with a case study in Baltimore that's been testing the integrative frameworks. So 3 neighborhoods in metropolitan Baltimore are being investigated in order to understand ecosystem services correlated with neighborhood design preferences. So these 3 neighborhoods are located in a watershed. And this morning we were talking about all different types of neighborhoods, Thames, town, world, city, all these different patches. This is a framework within which they're understood as working together. So these bottom-up neighborhood design strategies can be further scaled up through remote sensing analysis of land cover patch change, And they've developed a new high-resolution classification of urban land cover, of which these images are from, which allows for such integration of small-scale changes occurring over large areas over time. So it's a designed attentive circuit feedback loop, that drawing I showed before, where homeowners make decisions based on individual desires, as well as making decisions based on informed measures of ecosystem function that is tied to a larger scale ecosystem understanding. So we've been talking a lot about urban planning, but this project, I think, sort of works at the fine grain of individual homeowners, but it's linked to remote sensing. So there's a digital circuit in there, but it's also a part of a long-term ecosystem study there's a continuous process of monitoring and feedback within which the individual homeowner's decisions, there is a perception of it being linked to bigger, a larger scale ecosystem understanding. So I think if we start to take these 2 weeks to really relax our idea of what design is, or even urban design or urban planning, and start to find ways within which we can be designers, jumping scales, and not always going to let's say, a monument or of an architectural building, but getting into how some of the finer grain processes can have bigger effects as well. So the two spaces, the disturbance space I was talking about, and this bottom-up space, the ecosystem work in Baltimore. I've introduced them as to ask you to start to be sensitive to the difference between these two spaces, or attentive towards them, as we're in this session now about thinking about cities. And the way that I've been understanding them was even touched on this morning when we started by summarizing the morning session. Akbar spoke about speed. So the fast change space is the disaster space, or disturbance, resulting from a failure to absorb shocks. As I said, it's inequitable, yet productive. It's sort of a condition where natural systems interrupt our attention, they get in the way. And then the slow space is the homeowner space, which is bottom-up, distributed, and fine-grain. It's digital, so it's linked to satellite, and it's monitored. It has a long time frame, and its transformation is incremental. Maybe it's more equitable, don't know yet. Maybe it is able to deal with fast ecosystem change if people are sensitive. If there is change, they may be more agile, like I said at the beginning. If we let ourselves be small, maybe we get smart and become more agile. And it's also a space where I think Latour writes about other beings and other processes demand our attention. So the fast space is where natural processes interrupt our attention, but the slow space is where we're tuned into maybe other beings demanding our attention. I know there are many histories many stories, or not stories, but many ways in which to enter China urbanism, but the CBD building that I talked about earlier. Our interest is to wonder, are there signs of this this homeowner, this BES, this bottom-up distributed activism? They call it more urban design participation and activism in the new school language. Is that adaptive capacity of people here? Is it becoming present? Are people able to adapt to the sort of the CBD process, which is linking to being globally competitive? It's sort of looking that way. Are people able to work when the city is looking in another direction? Are people able to sort, sense, engage the nonlinear dynamics of urban ecosystems into practices of sustainable action in relation to cities as resilient ecological systems? I think that question is quite a different way of engaging the discourse, let's call it, on sustainable development. I think it brings forward attention to different types of processes and spaces and forms. So what I've been trying to sort of bring you through these unstable images is to talk about the ecology of the city, not the ecology in the city. You know, it's often the word ecology is used to explain trees or vegetation or anything green. But I've been trying to talk about the ecology of the city. And the other shift I've been trying to talk through is urban design in the city, not urban design of the city. And I think that's something everyone has been trying to comprehend in the last day. So I'm also trying to differentiate urban design from urban planning in that way that it's participatory and bottom up, but also remote and digital. Sort of skips that bigger zone within which we're very attentive to, because it's so interrupts you, let's say. It's the fast space. So there's a simultaneity of the fast space and the slow space. Urban design is the feedback loops in between them. So William Birch, who is a forester at the Yale School of Forestry, notes that humans are still learning to live in cities. I like this when you talk to ecologists. They have a nice long time frame. It's sort of even bigger than, I don't know, geologic time. So if we're still learning, all of us, how to live together, how to live in cities, are these unstable images something helpful to us to start to engage the inherently dynamic quality of our bodies and also our natural systems and our cities? So going back to Schumpeter, who we started with, the economist, his project did not end merely with the characterization of creative destruction, but also concerned itself with the impact of new innovations on social and economic lives. He held that, as a rule, new combinations of productive means are embodied in new productive units that generally do not arise out of old ones, but start producing side by side with the old production units competing with them and drawing away the necessary means of productions or inputs from them, And as a result, the newer units already operating more efficiently, the old ones eventually eliminate them. I think you call that more of a modernist idea. But what we've been talking about is something that locates design, as I said, within an attentive circuit, sort of within something. It's more of a feedback model rather than the competitive model. I hope that's clear. But the concern with the impact on social and economic lives is the same. So the question that arises from sort of how you locate this in a question to ask is, what are the spaces of resilience and social justice in the places of design for growth and prosperity, which is the CBD project. And so that's sort of that's the question I want to leave you with, and it's the question I want us to explore in the drawing project that we're going to do after the break. In the break, this is where I want your feedback into these unstable images, and if you're starting to find them helpful in the way that they can unpack and open up, hopefully, your thinking, and then hopefully by the end of the 2 weeks, our sort of getting traction in our agency within which, where we can all understand and be designing for resilience. So I want you all to get into groups of 2 or 3. We can get mostly groups of 2. I think there'll be 10 groups of 3. So there are 30 groups. It's good to work with people you don't know. We have packets over here on the wall. So as you go to your break, you can go and meet a new person, and you can also pick a packet that you're a patch of the city that you want to work with. And the patches go, I should mention, the patches go from the patches go from Suzhou to Shanghai, or Shanghai to Suzhou. So we're all going to start to engage this emphasis on the secondary cities and not be so centralized on Shanghai. So we've got a transect to new CBD and sort of in other. I will tell you more how it will work. We're going to draw, and when we come back, I'll give you some instructions. But I think we should take a break, and I'll guide you when we come back.